Hello there. How are you? Welcome to this session on podcasting. I'm going to talk to you in some depth about acquiring new listeners for your podcast, which once you've done, you can do so much more with. I've got a few slides for you today. I've got a presentation to talk through, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about me as well. But just a bit of housekeeping. We're going to run for 45 minutes as per all of the other sessions. I am live. If you see me looking over here, I'm looking in the chat and in the mentions and the public polls and so on and so forth. So say hello. Let me know what you're working on. Let me know your podcasting experience. I'll look into the chat and dig into that chat throughout the session as well. And if you've got any questions, feel free, like I said, pop them in the chat and I'll make sure to just address those as they come up as well. Leave a little bit of time at the end for any Q&A sessions, of course. Now, we are going to talk podcasting. Podcasting is a hot topic right now in not only content creation, but digital marketing overall. There are so many people using podcasting at varying stages throughout their funnel. And podcasting is what I do every single day. I have been working in podcasting now since 2013. I've been producing content in podcasting since 2013, when there was only about 180,000 podcasts in the world. Now, there are significantly more than that. We'll get to that in a little while. And I also run a platform called Captivate.fm, a growth-focused podcast hosting, analytics, and distribution platform where we work with around 11,000 podcasts, and we help them to grow their show. We distribute to Apple and Spotify and Amazon. In short, podcasting is my day-to-day every single day. But before that, I used to own a digital marketing agency, a design, brand, and digital agency, where we'd work with brands across the world and also local businesses. So I've got a range of knowledge, which is why marketing and podcasting are the perfect little segue for me. So I'm going to dig in to the session. If you do have any questions, let me know in the live chat. I am going to be online looking at that, as you can see down here. But without further ado, let's get into the listener acquisition flow, because this is all about getting more genuine listeners. Think about it as marketers or anyone that is a business owner. If we have any type of content, whether it's audio, video, or written content, the goal of that is to generate attention, to work through the standard cliches of generating interest and desire, and then pushing people to take some action. So no matter what the content is, the goal is to generate business, revenue, and relationships. And podcasting is no different. But in order to do that, we have to look at this scenario, which is we want to get more genuine listeners to our podcast, not fleeting, transient people. So let's talk about this. We're going to talk about building your audience by picking the ultimate trailer format, which is going to lead you into being able to get some fantastically genuine listeners that you can do whatever you want with as digital marketers. Okay. So in this session, we're going to talk about the content hamster wheel. We're going to talk about understanding the listener acquisition flow, and we're going to talk about building the perfect podcast trailer and why that is vital to your success in this type of content. Podcasting is a hot topic right now. These are the ways that you can get ahead. Now, the content hamster wheel is a fascinating problem in podcasting, in that what happens is you basically tell people to subscribe to your podcast. That is usually your only call to action. It's the only thing that you do when it comes to your podcast. Now, if you think about it, if you're trying to build a business, if you're a marketer, working this audio content into your marketing strategy that includes wider content, what we really struggle with is, as marketers, we wouldn't ordinarily tell someone to go and subscribe to something else from day one. You know, even an email list is a lot to ask. We wouldn't go and tell someone to go and buy something early on. We would nurture them. We would build them through, and we would get to know them. We would push them into our funnel. We would push them into our onboarding, into our sequencers, and we would push people through to then building that trust. And podcasting is no different, but people basically just go literally through the motions of just saying, look, I got a podcast, go and subscribe. And that's pretty much all we do as podcasters. And it looks like this. Our marketing for our podcasts, which are intended to generate business, looks like this. This is the usual best case podcast marketing cycle, where right in the center, we've got the release week. We've got the time that we spend releasing the podcast. That's the release week. And then to the left and the right of it, we've sort of got a little bit of pre-release and a little bit of ongoing marketing. So in the pre-release phase, what we tend to do is maybe a week before we release an episode, or maybe a couple of days, or whatever that time frame may be for you, we tease the episode and we'll say, hey, look, coming up, we've got Mark Asquith on the podcast talking about how to grow a podcast. Here's an audiogram. Here's an image. Here's a XYZ piece of promotional material. Go and subscribe. And then when we release the episode, we do the same thing. Hey, we got Mark on the show. Go and subscribe. Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, email list. Hey, we got Mark on the show. Go and subscribe. Hey, we've got Mark on the show. Go and subscribe. Hey, we got Mark on the show. Go and subscribe. It's all transient, but what we're asking people to do is to subscribe. Now, that ongoing cycle on the right-hand side is where we just throw, and I still see this every day, where we throw our podcast episodes into Buffer or into Hootsuite. And what we do is we just recycle that sharing content. But the calls to action are still always the same. Hey, we had Mark on the show a year ago, 2 years ago. Go and subscribe. Hey, we had Mark on the show 4 years ago. Go and subscribe. I still get tagged in these things, all right, 4 or 5 years after I've been on an episode. Now, the problem with this is that it all boils down to this thing in the bottom right, which is, hey, I have a podcast, go subscribe right now. That's all we're ever asking people to do. The problem with that, however, is this. In order to be a marketer, we have to measure something. And the thing that we measure when it comes to podcasts is downloads. And that's all right, kind of sounds good. You know, we can map ROI to then email subscriptions through and so on and so forth, and even potential sales if we can attribute it. But we're essentially, as a podcaster or someone producing a podcast for a business, measuring downloads. What we really want is listeners that represent people. So we're measuring downloads. We want listeners, but we're asking for subscribers. That feels a little weird, doesn't it? There's some disparity there. Doesn't feel like we're all on the same page. But the bigger problem is this podcast listener sat here on this beanbag. They don't really care about us. They don't care about our show. They don't care about the content that we're putting out. They don't care about your podcast or my podcast. They don't care. Because all they want is good quality content. They don't care about what we say until we make them care. In order to make them care, we've got to get to know them. We've got to nurture them. We've got to help them to understand that what we do is something that they can align to and that they can benefit from, or they can just enjoy, and that they will want to come back to and they'll want to advocate for. And the subscription, asking for a subscribe is too much. It's too heavy. It's very, very, very presumptuous on our part to assume that someone would want to invest so much time in listening to an episode of our podcast when they've never heard of us. In fact, we just ask way too much, way too soon. We ask way too much, way too soon. And we wouldn't do this in any other type of marketing. We wouldn't do this in email marketing, or if we were doing B2C marketing through a range of different tactics. We wouldn't do that at all. We would nurture people. We would allow them to get to know us. And we can't expect this once only, kind of shout about it, old style broadcast stuff, this go and subscribe. We can't expect that to work for our podcast, because ultimately, like I said, as marketers, our job is to use our podcast to get people to do something else that will benefit them. So we ask way too much, way too soon. And very often we're coming across like salespeople. We're coming across like the dodgy Ron Burgundy style car salesman. And imagine this scenario, okay? You walk onto a car lot and you are just lurking. You're just browsing. You kind of think you maybe want a new car. But the second you step on to the car lot, onto the parking space, you get out of your old car, open the door, jump out. The salesman spots you, makes a beeline for you and says, okay, welcome. We are a car sales showroom. Shall we go and do the paperwork? No, of course not. You know, I've only just shown up. I don't know you. I don't know what I want. I don't know what I'm interested in. And that's what subscribe does. Subscribe makes people feel like they are being put off. It makes people feel like they aren't going to dive into your content, because why would they? You're pushing them too hard, too fast. And actually, that's backed up by data, because not only does the word subscribe come with connotations of hard sell, but it actually comes with connotations of financial risk as well. Let me explain. This is data from Infinite Dial, which is run by Edison Research, the team Tom Webster, and the team at Edison, and in collaboration with Triton Digital. And one of the biggest reasons you'll see there, 38% of people underlined in blue, second from bottom, believe that they don't subscribe to podcasts. They don't listen to podcasts because they believe that you have to pay to subscribe. They believe that you have to pay to subscribe. And why is that? Well, we subscribe to Amazon Prime. We subscribe to Netflix, to Disney Plus. We subscribe to Gray's Box. We subscribe to Harry's Razors. We subscribe, usually with our card, with some payment details, with Apple Pay. We subscribe. And very recently, this word subscribe has actually been handled by Apple and Spotify, two of the biggest outlets in podcasting in the world. They've changed their subscribe button to the word follow. So they've changed subscribe to the word follow. Now, this is underpinned by a few more fiscal changes behind the scenes at Apple and Spotify that I won't get into here. But they understand better than anyone that the word subscribe comes with potential financial implications, but follow doesn't. It's less stress. It's less obligation. It's clear that you don't have to listen to every episode, or that you're not going to have to give something, whether it's an email address, because we subscribe to email lists, or whether it is something financial. We don't have to give anything in order to enjoy the podcast. And that is a huge change in the industry, okay? So even the big guys, even Apple and Spotify are understanding that this word subscribe is a problem. So we have to stop. We have to stop, okay? And we can't then rely on our simple podcast marketing, our blast it and forget it marketing, the tweets, the Instagram posts that just say, hey, I've had Mark on the podcast, go and subscribe. Hey, guess what's coming up next week? Go and subscribe. Hey, guess what we did 3 years ago? Go and subscribe. We can't rely on that anymore. And here is another big reason why we can't. There are now 2.1 million podcasts in the world. It's actually 2,094,500 podcasts in the world. This week, we will tip over to 2.1 million podcasts. This is live data from Podcast Industry Insights run by my friend, Mr. Daniel J. Lewis. We have to do more, okay? We have to do more. There are 2.1 million podcasts, and our podcast marketing is not enough. Simply not enough. We've got a great point in from Daryl. Can I pin this? I can. There we go. Isn't it amazing how guilty we are of doing the things to other people that we hate other people, like car salespeople, doing to us? This is a great perspective. Well, thank you, Daryl. We do. We hate it, but we don't think we're doing it. We're not always cognizant of the fact, because we're busy, aren't we? We're busy marketing, busy creating content, busy marketing that content, which in turn markets our business. We're very, very busy doing things. So what we do is we do the bare minimum. We do just enough to get our content out into the world, but then wonder why it doesn't quite perform. Now, of course, when you launch a podcast, you will absolutely see traction, because I mean, we've all been there as marketers. We've all been there as business owners. You know, you start something, whether it's a business, whether it's a project, you know, whatever it is, you will start something, and what will happen is you will get traction because your peers, your friends, your family, the people that know you, your colleagues, they will listen, they'll subscribe, they'll dive in, they'll enjoy it, they'll understand what you're doing, and they'll want to support it. Of course they will. Of course they'll want to do that. So you're right. We're not always aware of what we are doing to other people. And I think it's down to time. I don't think we do it in a nefarious way. So let me introduce you to the podcast listener acquisition flow, which is sort of visually designed. I've visually designed it because we're all marketers. I've designed it to look a little bit like a value ladder. And this is the listener acquisition flow. Let me just unpin that one from Daryl. So the listener acquisition flow, which comes with the goal of giving people enough of us as podcasters, enough of us at the right time to cultivate loyalty, recurring listens, and advocacy. Let me just recap that. Give people enough of us and our brand at the right time to cultivate loyalty, recurring listens, and advocacy. That's important because the word subscriber doesn't map to that stuff. So let me walk you through this. The listener acquisition flow comes in 5 different stages. At the bottom, we have the lurker, followed by the explorer. We have the listener. We've got the subscriber. Notice how high up the listener acquisition flow the subscriber is. And then we've got the fan. Lurker, explorer, listener, subscriber, and fan. Looks a bit bizarre. And, we're sort of expected to push people in here. We're trying to acquire listeners at the subscriber stage, wherein we expect them to be so committed to us that they'll even call themselves a subscriber. They will devour everything that we put out there. We expect them to be fans right away because they've got to know us just a little bit. But actually, what we're doing to try and get them to subscribe is tweeting and putting it on Instagram. And yeah, sure, maybe sending it to our email list. But those guys are already in, they're already largely in when it comes to our brand because they subscribe, they double opted into our email list. So this is where we try and acquire listeners at the wrong space. Okay, we try and get people in at the wrong level. And when it doesn't work, when our podcast subscriptions and our downloads don't go up with relative speed compared to the amount of marketing that we put out, we wonder why. We wonder why that's not working. And the reason for that is because we're targeting people with the wrong thing at the wrong time. Okay, so let me explain each one of these different things for you. Okay, because like I said, we try and acquire listeners at the subscriber stage. But the new listeners are right here at the bottom. They're right down here at the bottom. They're at the lurker stage. They are just lurking. They're sort of looking for something new. Maybe they're new to podcasting. Maybe they're completely unaware of what podcasting is. There's another concept that I've got out in the wild called the podcast discoverability triangle, which discusses the 3 types of podcast listener that we should be trying to acquire. And broadly speaking, they are people who are receptive to the sharing of our episodes, the people who will be responsive to word of mouth. They are the people on point 2 who are actually familiar with our subject matter. Maybe we run an SEO podcast and these people are interested in SEO, but they're not interested in listening to SEO podcasts because they don't know about podcasting or they're just not interested in it. That's point 2 on the discoverability triangle. They're a set of people that we can target. And then point number 3, the third set of people on the podcast discoverability triangle are people who know about podcasts, but didn't realize that they could get your content via a podcast. So there may be people in the SEO podcasting example, maybe people that listen to digital marketing radio, or they maybe listen to Seth Godin, or maybe they'll listen to something from HubSpot or from Ryan Dice. Maybe they're listening to all sorts of podcasts. They'll listen to the Social Media Marketer podcast with Michael Stelzner, whatever it is, but they don't know that you have a podcast. Even though they might want your in-depth SEO analysis, they don't know that you have it. So they're point 3 on the discoverability triangle. And these lurkers all live in one of those 3 places. So let me just recap those 3 places again. They are people. Number 1, there's a type of people who are receptive to word of mouth and sharing from other people that listen to your podcast. There are a second type of people who understand that you talk about a great thing. They are interested in your topic. They are interested in what you have to say, but they don't have a clue what podcasting is. And there are a set of people, point number 3, who understand what podcasting is, but don't have a clue about you. And that's our job, is to gather all of these 3 types of people. And these people that are lurking, that are just there, guide them up this path. Okay? Now, one thing I want you to remember with these lurkers, all right, because it's inherent to the problem of saying subscribe. The biggest issue that we have is that we forget that their time is valuable. We forget that they are bombarded with every other Twitter person and every other Instagram person and every other LinkedIn poster, TikToker, email marketer, all doing the same thing. Saying, go and listen to our podcast, go and subscribe, go and listen, go and subscribe. Hey, I had this person, I had Daryl on the podcast, go and subscribe. They are all going through the same motions as we are to promote their podcast. People are being bombarded because podcasting's cool now, isn't it? It's sexy and trendy. I remember when it wasn't back in the day. I was not a cool or sexy person back in 2013 when I said I was going into podcasting. And I remain not cool or sexy now, but at least I'm doing podcasting. And the point is that now, because everyone's doing it, all the messaging is the same. All the messaging is the same. Go and subscribe. Hey, I had this person on selling a book. Go and subscribe. Hey, I had this person on who wants to promote their course. Go and subscribe. It's the same thing. But these messages don't map with these lurkers because the lurkers are scrolling, or maybe they're looking for recommendations. Maybe they're about to set off on a drive to work. When I drive to work, I know that I listen to new podcasts and I'm ready to search for something. I'll often do it in Apple or Spotify, where I'll follow the advice of other people on there or the recommendation engines. And I think, okay, what am I looking for? I'll search for a topic that I'm interested in right now. I'm doing DIY right now, doing a bit of renovation on the house. I need to know how to drywall something. So I'll search for a DIY podcast and I'll consume it on the way to work. But you only get that same 7 to 8 seconds that you get on a website to attract someone. It's why the cover art needs to be good. It's why the description and the title needs to be to the point. You only get that same amount of time, that 7 to 10 seconds, to attract me to listen to your podcast. That's no different to any other type of marketing. So if you're telling me to subscribe, you're forgetting that my time is valuable. Maybe I'm walking to the car and I've got like the 5 seconds to fire up Spotify, quickly search for a DIY podcast, and then make a decision based on a quick scroll. We're forgetting that. Okay, we're forgetting that. So time is valuable for podcast listeners, and in particular, the lurkers. Now, let me just define how I add demarcation to these types of listener or these type of people. I don't want to say listener because they might not all be listening yet. So the demarcation that I add to allow me to really visualize this listener acquisition flow is as follows. The lurker, the sort of wants to listen to a new podcast and that it's kind of in the mood for something fresh. They've probably heard of you in some way. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, maybe they've been on social media. Maybe they've seen me at digital marketing conferences. Maybe they've seen you at the same conferences. Maybe they've seen you on Instagram or LinkedIn. Maybe a friend has spoken about you over a beer. Maybe you've been out and someone has been out and you've come up in conversation because they were discussing the thing that you discuss. Back to the SEO podcast example, maybe the small business owner was out with their marketing friend and said, you know what, I'd really like to learn a bit of SEO. And that friend has gone, well, you know what, actually, I was listening to a podcast about why all small business owners should learn basic SEO the other day. I forget the person's name. It was Mark something. And you get the picture, all right? These lurkers have kind of heard of you in some way, shape, or form. But they're not ready to give you 45 minutes of their time. So if they follow you on Twitter and you are hitting them with, hey, go and subscribe, why would they do that? That's nuts. Why would they go, well, okay, now I've got to know Daryl on Twitter. And Daryl keeps hitting me with these subscribe messages. I don't know well enough to go and give 45 minutes of my time. That one drive that I have today, where I've been looking forward to just enjoying some new content, I'm not going to risk that time on someone that I don't really know. So that subscribe call to action is fraught with problems. The next person, the explorer, okay, is someone that is ready to sample your show. So maybe they came in as a lurker. Maybe they liked a little bit of what you said on Twitter. And I use Twitter as the example because it's the one that I'm most present on. If you look over at Mr. Asquith on Twitter, you'll see that that's literally the only place that I do most of my communicating. A little bit on LinkedIn. So I'm on Twitter. And, I'm looking and I see Daryl and I say, well, this is brilliant. Okay, I really like what Daryl says. She seems like a very, very, very highly conscious marketer. She's very good at what she does. She's very articulate. She seems very fair. And she seems very open to conversation. She seems very open to figuring out what is going on in marketing. And she seems very knowledgeable in what she is saying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just investigate her a little bit more. I'm going to look at the website. I'm going to kind of maybe scroll back through some old tweets. Maybe I'm going to engage with her more on Twitter. And at that point, they move from being a lurker to being an explorer because they've taken the next steps into a larger world, to quote Obi-Wan Kenobi. First steps into a larger world. They have gone further. They're ready to start sampling your content. But boom, you hit them in the face with brilliant. Welcome to the ecosystem. Go and subscribe to my podcast. So, okay, now I've shown a little bit of interest and you're saying that I've still got to spend 45 minutes listening to an episode of my choosing. Help me out here. Help me out here. So the explorer is ready to sample your show. But maybe not dive into like a 50-minute episode. Next up, in the middle, we have the listener. Someone that has gone through that and they've decided that they do like you and they've listened to one or two episodes and they tune in. Now imagine me, I'm on my drive to work and I think to myself, well, do you know what? I'm in the mood for a podcast. And instead of searching, because everyone's telling me to subscribe, instead of searching for a new podcast, what I do is I look at my current following list, the podcast to which I'm already subscribed. And what I do is I skip through and I think, well, Daryl's got a podcast, Mark's got a podcast, that's the Jordan Harbinger show. I could listen to Esprit Devore, I could listen to any one of these 10 podcasts that I'm subscribed to. But I don't feel bad if I don't. I don't feel bad if I don't listen to Mark's show. Like if I miss an episode, that's all right. Do you know what? I don't even care if I don't go back and listen to all the back catalogue. And if I miss an episode, so what? I'm not even going to worry about going to listen to it. I'll just pick the ones that I like. That is a listener. And the problem is most podcasters think they want listeners when they really want fans. Most podcasters think they want listeners, not understanding that listeners are just the people that dip in and dip out. They say, yeah, I know about the Jordan Harbinger show. Yes, I know about Esprit Devore. Yes, I know about Kathy Doyle. Yes, I know about these fantastic podcasters. And yes, I've listened to a show, but I am not a fan. I just dip in. I like them, but I wouldn't give them any money. That's a great point of differentiation. Next up, we have the subscriber, which is what we think we want as podcasters, a subscriber. This is a person that is devoted to listening to as many of your podcasts as possible, as many of them as they can. You are one of the top 3 or 4 that they choose to listen to. Okay? I like to listen to Rock on Tours by Gary Kemp. It's a musical podcast. You'll notice in the background a guitar and a bass back there and a keyboard. I'm a very musical person. So I listen to Rock on Tours. I was brought up on old rock music. Thank you, Mum. And they're in one of my top 3 or 4. So is Jordan Harbinger. So are a couple of other shows like Law and maybe some of the comedy shows that I listen to. And how I choose what to listen to depends on my mood. Depends what I choose to be in the mood for on my drive. But those 3 or 4 podcasts are the ones that I will look back on the back catalogue and decide to listen to as many of those episodes as I can. So I am a subscriber. And then right at the top, a fan. Okay. This is our ultimate. This is the goal. This is the absolute panacea. This is what we want to achieve as a podcaster. We want someone to be a fan, so much so that they will tell everyone that they should listen to the podcast. They should tell everyone that you are one of their top podcasts. And when someone says, hey, do you have a podcast recommendation? I'm thinking about getting into it. You are one of the ones, if not the one, that they recommend. That is the goal. And maybe these people even financially subscribe to you on Patreon. Or in the world of marketers, maybe they're the ones that jump really heartily onto your email list and are receptive and open to your product, to your brand, your service, and importantly, your community, so that they can get embedded and start to buy stuff from you. The fan is the goal. Okay? But the problem is, like I said, we send people to the wrong place. Our calls to action are wrong. So what I'm going to do is tell you how to promote the podcast, how to build listeners, and how to generate this listener acquisition flow. What we have to do is we send all of our calls to action here. All of our calls to action, we send people assuming that they are lurkers to the bottom of our value ladder, to the bottom of our process, or to the top of our podcast acquisition funnel, however you want to visualize that in your head. And what we do is we send them there and we give them the call to action to listen to our trailer. Now, I'll talk to you about trailers in a second, but what I do is I use this on my Twitter profile. The trailer that I have is pinned at all times to the top of my Twitter profile, so that I can say to people, go and listen to the trailer. It's on the top of my Twitter at Mr. Asquith, because they're already on Twitter. They know about Twitter. Or it's embedded at the top of my website on my podcasts page. The first thing that you will see is the trailer to my podcast. Now, look how long that is. 1 minute and 17 seconds long. 1 minute and 17 seconds long. And I'm going to tell you how to build this trailer in a few minutes. But here's the kicker. A trailer is a quick decision that doesn't ask too much. So when we're promoting our podcast, our goal should be, hey, look, if you're new to my profile, if you're new to Twitter, if you're new to whatever, if you're first into the ecosystem here, welcome. I do have a podcast, and go ahead and check out the trailer because you might like it. Now, I'm going to talk to you about that trailer because that is vital, all right? I'll get to that in a second. But we also need a method for nurturing people up the acquisition flow, turning them into explorers, turning them into listeners, turning them into subscribers, and subsequently into fans. This is the methodology. What we do on the bottom left is we attract people with a 90-second trailer. I say 90 seconds, 2 minutes. I'd even posit that you can go 3 minutes on this one. Don't go much longer than that. Think movie trailer, all right? And I'll get to the format. I'm going to give you a format that you can steal. You can copy it, just screenshot it, whatever. Just have it. I'm going to give you that format in a bit because it works. And what we do is we attract that lurker with a 90-second trailer. But then what we do is we step them up to being an explorer by curating content. What do I mean by that? Well, curating content means that we don't leave people in the wilderness to fend for themselves. What I'm talking about here is that we don't say to someone, hi, this is Mark Asquith. This is the Podcast Accelerator, helping busy podcasters to build their own podcast audience in just a few minutes per week. Go and subscribe in your podcast app of choice. That is the usual kind of trailer call to action. The problem with that is that, again, it's like, oh, it's fluffy. People leave. People aren't interested. People don't know what to do next. And as marketers, we're better than that. We know that. We wouldn't do that in any of our other marketing, so why do it in podcasting? Instead, what we do is this. Hi, this is Mark Asquith. Welcome to the Podcast Accelerator, the podcast that helps busy podcasters to grow their audience in short, actionable bursts. If you're new to the show, welcome. And I highly recommend that you go and check out episode 27, where I talked to Rand Fishkin about SEO best practices for podcasters. That should be your starting point because it's the episode that my audience has enjoyed and downloaded the most. And I think you will like it too. And hey, in the show notes, I've put a link to that episode. Now, the cool thing with that is that you're giving people a call to action whilst also curating. So what you're not doing is you're not saying, well, look, go and just get this in your podcast app of choice. What you're doing is you're saying to someone, okay, here's a next step. Here's a link. Here's a thing to go and consume now, because you're in that exploration stage. You've listened to the trailer, and the trailer has helped you to decide whether you like or loathe my voice, the way that I approach things, my energy. That's all right. If it's, you've only spent 90 seconds with me, that's okay. If it's not for you, you've only lost 90 seconds. Go ahead and just move on. But if you love it, that 90 seconds was that first step into a larger world. Go and listen to episode X, 27, whatever it is. And that's how you get people moving from explorer to listener. Now, from lurker to explorer. To get people from explorer to listener, one of the biggest problems that people have in podcasting is they assume that podcast listeners will like the entire podcast. They might not. So what we do is we've got to give ourselves a chance to bet on what these listeners will like. You're different to me, and you're different to Daryl, and Daryl's different to Leah, and to Ruta, and to Vaso. Everyone is different. All these people that are in the chat, we're all different people. Okay, and we like different things. So one block of a 45-minute piece of audio, when you get them into this this one block of 45 minutes, that one block of content has as much chance of alienating a percentage of the audience than anything else does. So what we do is we build relatable segments and involvement and behind the scenes. Now, what I'm talking about here is this. On my new podcast, which is called In and Around Podcasting, it's an industry show about the podcasting industry. Rather than just saying, let's talk about the industry, what I'm talking about is really just creating these segments where the people that won't necessarily like the podcasting news segment may like the very highly branded, wonderfully whimsical podcasting wish list, which is where we talk about things that we wish existed in podcasting. Maybe they'll like the fantastically named wave file, where we just give a wave and a shout out to someone doing great work in podcasting. These segments are marketable. They're like TV show segments and radio segments. You can do best ofs, the best of this segment during 2021. And people will heartily decide which of these segments they like. And very often, listener attrition will drop because you will keep people on board because they just want to tune into that one segment. But whilst they're there, they will check out the other segments. Same with the involvement. Give people a shout out. What you'll notice during my talk here, I've mentioned Daryl a few times. I mentioned Leah, an artist, and I mentioned Vaso and Ruta. I'm involving people. And I do this with my podcast as well. Hey, I was talking to Louise over on Twitter this week who asked me a fantastic question about how to build a podcast audience on a limited budget. Here is how you do it, Louise. Go and follow Louise at Twitter username. And I involve people and I give people behind the scenes. I push people into Twitter and say, look, here I am recording the Accelerator live. And I'm here on Twitter doing that via Twitter Spaces or Periscope or whatever. So that is how you get people not just listening to that one episode, but getting them coming back for the second and the third, and to go and listen to maybe one out of your last 10. And then we pull people up to being a subscriber. We nurture them with personal communications, online meetups, offline meetups in a post-COVID world, extra access to things. I do this with something that I call a presence promise. I promise to be present every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. UK time on Facebook in our Podcast Launch Accelerator group for anyone that wants to launch a podcast. I guarantee that every single week I am there doing 30 minutes open office hours and podcast launch workshops. So tune in and come along, get eyes on me as a person. That's my presence promise. This nurtures people into being subscribers because they get to know you and you move up their rankings as one of the top 3 podcasts that they listen to. They get to know you and they get ready to anticipate and excited about your next podcast episode. And at that point, you can turn people into fans. People have got to know you that much that they become your fans. And as marketers, that is our job. Turn people into fans so that when a product fits their needs, they will buy it from us, not from anyone else. They've done the research. They've done the advocacy. They've got to know us. That is how you use the listener acquisition flow, all right? That is how you use it. Now, suddenly when we talk about that, it makes this old school kind of pre-release schedule feel a little bit weak. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this, but it's not going to grow your audience. This is what to do. Now, I do talk about this a lot on Twitter. Like I said, I'm a bit limited on time. I can go deeper if you want on Twitter at Mr. Asquith. But now to the trailer. I've got 4 minutes, 23 seconds left. Like I said, I pin this trailer everywhere. What trailer format should you use? Okay, copy this. Just copy this format, all right? Who you are, a short line on your background, the days and times that you release your episodes, the format of your episodes, how to find your podcast, and where to find your podcast, okay? So let me give you a quick run through. Hi, this is Mark Asquith, CEO and founder of Captivate.fm. I am a podcaster, and I work with thousands of podcasters every single day, which is why you can be sure that the advice that I give you on how to grow your podcast is built on fact. Every single Monday and Wednesday, I release an episode of the Podcast Accelerator that is usually under 10 minutes and that will give you actionable insight on how to grow your audience using methodologies that I have tried myself and that come from my years and years in marketing and in podcasting. My episodes will be solo, but every now and again, I'm going to bring on guests and fantastic people from the podcast and the marketing industry to help you with your show. And you can get your podcast for free in any podcast app that you choose. And I highly recommend that you go and start with episode 27, where I talk to this person about this thing. It's a simple format. It took about 90 seconds, and it's fairly simple to do, all right? But here is the key. Take a screenshot of that. Take a screenshot of that. And what you will see is that the key piece of this is keep it approximately 90 to 120 seconds long. Don't do a big, long music introduction. Maybe have some music running underneath like this. Underneath. Not intro. Underneath. Music bed, because you got people's attention for such a short amount of time. And tell people it's free, because subscriptions imply financial incentive. Free. Free, free, free. Now, you can grab this ebook. This is just on my website, markasquith.com. It's, usual stuff. Go and get it if you want it. The 9 Unconventional Ways to Grow Your Podcast, markasquith.com. And remember, the goal of our podcast is to get more genuine listeners. It's, as marketers, to build fans of our brand and our content, our ethos, our approach, and ultimately our products. And people will engage with this. They'll engage with voice because it's being piped directly into the ears. There is not one form of marketing that is more intimate than podcasting, but we can't forget that it is a form of marketing and we should give it the care, attention, the planning, strategy, and tactical implementation and measurement that we would to any other marketing tactic. All right. If you need anything, let me know. I'm on Twitter at Mr. Asquith. I want to thank the Digital Marketing Conference here for having me. It's been a fantastic pleasure. I want to thank Daryl and everyone that has been in the chat live. We've had a good attendance. I want to thank you all for just coming along. Like I said, if you need anything, do hit me up. It'll be a real pleasure to just get involved and to do what I can. Let me know. We do have a poll running. Have you launched your podcast yet? We've got a pretty 50-50 split. We've got one 50% saying yes and one saying 50% saying podcasting isn't for me. And that's a really good point. Podcasting isn't for everyone. And if you don't believe that you can commit to building a podcast quite like this and really scaling it to help your business and your brand and your marketing activities on the wider spectrum, then it's probably not wise to do one. All right. So if you can do it like this. And if you can't, that's quite all right. All right. So let me know what I can do to help. Like I said, thank you to Daryl. Thank you to the team. And it's just a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure. We've got some fantastic speakers coming up, and I'm looking forward to sticking around for the next one. Thank you to everyone. Real pleasure. Thank you so very much. Let me know on Twitter what I can do. Connect on LinkedIn if you want. You'll see me. I've got a leather jacket on, which I don't wear all the time. Much love and enjoy the rest of the sessions. See you soon.